Welcome to the Unveiling Shadows podcast. I'm your host, Kimberly Mosby. Join me as I dive into powerful stories of resilience and strength. In each episode, I sit down with guests who have faced similar journeys of coercive control, financial manipulation, and personal invasion. Together, we uncover the shadows, share our experiences, and inspire others to reclaim their lives. Tune in, listen, and be a part of the community that stands tall against the forces that seek to control us. Hi. Welcome to Unveiling Shadows solo cast. So if you like what I'm doing, like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Now that we know that Bill Gates is part of the Committee of 300, let's see who controls Bill Gates.
Internet friends, in previous videos, we've covered who Bill Gates was before Microsoft, who Bill Gates was after Microsoft, and what it means to give eugenics a hot rebrand as population control. But today, we're going to go in a different direction because Bill Gates is just one guy. Today, we're going to look at the money and power behind Bill and discuss some companies and individuals that might not be household names, but they manage the names you know in your household. So let's take a closer look at one faction of what the children these days are calling the deep state. The history of the most popular coffee chain in the world began in 1971 in Seattle, Washington, which originally started off as a store that exclusively sold coffee beans. A decade later, Howard Schultz was hired as the marketing and sales director, and he quickly turned the coffee bean shop into a cafe, with his strategy being aggressive expansion as the years went on. But in the 1980s, Starbucks had gotten into financial trouble because the original founders had acquired a company called Peet's Coffee. The owner of Starbucks approached Schultz, relaying his intention to keep Peet's. Schultz was then offered ownership of Starbucks for $3.8 million if he could come up with the funds from private investors within 60 days. Schultz claimed that he had no money, and by the end of the month, he'd barely raised half, only to have the same Starbucks owner approach him saying that he'd received an unsolicited offer on the table for $4 million from a Titan investor. And if Schultz couldn't raise the money by the end of the month, he'd have to accept the offer. In Schultz's retelling of this story, he relayed these events to his attorney friend, and his attorney friend responded by telling Schultz to come into the office and speak with the senior partner at the firm, who just so happened to be William Gates Sr.,
Well, why am I not surprised?
father of Microsoft's Bill Gates. You know, Gates Sr., the attorney who sat on the board of Planned Parenthood before the days of Roe versus Wade. Gates Sr., who married Mary Maxwell, the banker's daughter and the granddaughter of the president of Seattle's Federal Reserve Bank. Yeah, Gates Sr. standing proud at 6 feet 7 inches tall. We're all familiar by this point. So Gates Sr. caught wind of this transaction and advised Schultz to take a walk with him. And they walked down to the unnamed rival buyer's office, where Gates Sr. gave the investor a verbal lashing, saying, "You should be ashamed of yourself. Stand down. This Schultz kid is gonna realize his dream." And then Gates turned to Schultz and instructed him to buy Starbucks. And not to worry, he and Bill Gates Jr. were gonna help him. What a beautiful story, right? It's got everything you could possibly want. Piping hot coffee, the rise of the underdog, and of course, a wise older gentleman looking out for the dreams of a young man. Yeah, sure, it's the same
With some strings attached, I'm sure.
fella who championed the early extermination of many potential dreams through Planned Parenthood. But we won't dwell on that because Gates Sr. made this one American dream come to fruition. Such inspiration. Truly achievable to anyone willing to put in the hard work. And of course, willing to accept a sweetheart deal and work around the quiet shadow ownership of a company. If there's anything Starbucks has been successful at, It's cornering a demographic by selling the cafe experience with the Starbucks cup as a status symbol, with the actual Starbucks logo being what most people think is a twin-tailed mermaid that Starbucks refers to as a siren. But it's actually a hybrid creature, her upper half being a human female and lower half being two fish tails, or two serpent tails. The coffee in that cup comes at an objectively high price. And one might assume that high prices equate to high quality or at least real ingredients. But when you break down the composition of Starbucks drinks and baked offerings, what you're left with is GMOs, pesticides, high fructose corn syrup, and traces of growth hormones throughout, all of which are linked to chronic disease and fertility issues.
Surprise!
Even the milk is GMO from cows that are fed a diet of GMO corn. And that corn is sprayed with pesticides like Monsanto's Roundup. If you've ever sprayed Roundup in your yard, you know from experience that it kills everything it comes into contact with. So what does it mean to ingest it on the daily? So Starbucks' priority should be to get away from the GMO Monsanto ingredients, right? Well, let's follow the money and demonstrate why they can't. The breakdown of Starbucks ingredients might just be an accent point on the story, but it's actually a really big deal, since we can draw a distinct line between the Schultz-Gates Starbucks sweetheart deal and the company that controls a majority of the world's food supply. Monsanto originally began as a chemical company.
Yeah, Monsanto, when she gets into this, is a bear company, and they put insecticides in the seeds and then sold them all over the world. And that caused the colony collapse in the early 2000s. And the French people were the ones that called it out, and they were pissed.
Eventually evolving into a pharmaceutical company, then partnered with the military to give us Agent Orange, the insecticide DDT, PCBs, and artificial growth hormones, which have done nothing but leave a trail of destruction in their wake. Monsanto has had to pay out millions upon millions of dollars to settle lawsuits because of the harmful effects of their chemicals. So they eventually shifted their focus to agriculture, and guess what? Now they control our food supply, and they were able to stay true to their roots by
control the food, control the water, control the people.
Introducing chemicals and genetic modification to crops. If we follow the trail of money from the origin of Starbucks, the breakdown of Starbucks ingredients leading us to Monsanto, we arrive at 2009, when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation purchased 500,000 Monsanto shares. Or at least that's what was published and documented in that fiscal year. In other words, that's an investment we know about. Bill simultaneously bought a huge amount of shares in Cargill, a faceless agri-giant that rules over the world's food commodities. And by doing this, he effectively has a huge financial stake in the world's food supply. And that supply is controlled by companies with less than pristine reputations. And that's putting it lightly. Later, Bill Gates invested millions and millions of dollars in plant-based meat alternative companies like Beyond Meat and the Impossible Burger, sold across upscale restaurants, supermarkets, and even fast food places like Burger King, Carl's Jr., and now Starbucks. The CEO of Impossible Foods is Patrick Brown, a Stanford biochemistry professor specializing in DNA research, whose father worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. While marketing professionals will engineer campaigns to paint these plant-based meats as healthy alternatives, it's proven and documented that these burgers use GMO soy and vegetable sprays with Monsanto Roundup. Recently, Monsanto was acquired by Bayer for $66 billion. Bayer is a German pharmaceutical company that was part of the IG Farben conglomerate back in the Third Reich and was convicted by the American military of taking advantage of the absence of legal and ethical constraints on medical experimentation to test its drugs on unwilling human subjects during World War II.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
You'd think that Bayer would have learned their lesson and maybe tried to behave, a little more ethically over the decades, but no. They have just as many scandals and lawsuits as Monsanto, like recently, when Bayer Laboratories realized their blood products were contaminated with HIV and decided that their financial investment in these products was too high to toss out all their vials of blood in a fiery dumpster. So they sold their HIV-tainted products to South America and Asia without the courtesy of a warning. Yes, this is the company that controls our pharmaceuticals and food supply. Aren't we all thrilled?
No, we're not.
No wonder Bill Gates is making it rain on these companies. They're literally the MVPs of his and his family's passion: population control.
A natural back pain discovery was sued by big pharma giants. This breakthrough, known in Switzerland as the mineral reset method, which
Back in the 80s, Bill Gates Sr., an attorney who sat on the board of Planned Parenthood before anyone even knew what Planned Parenthood was, and his son, the Microsoft co-founder and great-grandson of the Federal Reserve, played a key role in Howard Schultz's Starbucks empire. In the early 2000s, after a stint of bad publicity within the media for his legal trouble, Bill Gates established the Gates Foundation for his philanthropic endeavors, and has since killed a number of children and adults in India and Africa, leaving many paralyzed with his experimental pharmaceutical trials and vaccinations. During this time, not only has Bill Gates stated an explicit interest in population control, but he's also invested in pharmaceutical and agricultural giants like Monsanto, who have a notorious reputation for the outright disregard of human life. Not only that, but meaningful amounts of Monsanto chemicals can be found in Bill Gates' investments like Starbucks drinks and baked goods, Beyond Meat products, and Impossible Foods burgers. These chemicals have been proven to cause cancer and infertility. Sounds like some master plan laid out by one of the world's greatest boogeymen. But Bill Gates is just one guy.
He's a boogeyman for sure.
Who is really the driving force behind him? Who is the real financial powerhouse behind all of these companies? Who is the man behind the curtain? Well, I won't keep you waiting. If you follow the money, you arrive at one place: Bain & Company. Bain & Company was founded in 1973 by former bigwigs at the Boston Consulting Group.
Mitt Romney.
And those bigwigs and their families now own sports teams like the Boston Celtics, New England Patriots, and the Boston Red Sox. Multi-billionaires who sit on the board of the Federal Reserve. Bain & Company is one of the big three elite management consulting firms who has been notoriously secretive about itself and its work for clients, earning it the title of the KGB of consulting over the years. You might have heard of Bain & Company during Mitt Romney's run for presidency. The two most famous people out of Bain are Dick Cheney and Mitt Romney. Of course, Dick Cheney was vice president under the Bush administration, and Mitt Romney almost became president. Mitt Romney himself started off at Boston Consulting Group, where he worked alongside none other than Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Eventually, Mitt Romney went on to work for Bain, where he quickly rose up the ranks, becoming one of the company's vice presidents by the late 70s, heading Bain's venture capital arm called Bain Capital. You might not ever guess this, but the wholesome Mormon Mitt Romney was literally shaping the culture and realities of the United States and countries around the world through Bain Company. While Bain functions as a private equity firm, I think we can quite confidently say that Bain Company is a U.S. intelligence front and military-industrial company, since some of the most famous people out of Bain are high-level government officials.
So I've said this a few times, that our government is ran by corporations, and it's true.
And Bain's most famous clients were, and are, Halliburton, Raytheon, Monsanto, Microsoft, Starbucks, and even the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bain manages a great portion of the Fortune 500 companies. That's why their stocks do so well. And while Bain says they're a consulting firm, their pattern is one of a buyout firm that comes in, takes over, and quietly leaves the shell intact while they place their own people in positions of power within a company. You might be surprised to hear that Bain manages Ryan Seacrest, The guy who is responsible for the reality TV show Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And we can effectively say that the wholesome Mormon Mitt Romney was the guy who put the transsexual agenda on television through the Bruce Caitlyn Jenner saga. So when Kanye West gets mouthy and is hauled off on a stretcher and put in timeout for a few days, only to return looking like a Marshall Mathers wannabe clone, that's all Bain Company. When you see Bill Gates doing an Ask Me Anything question and answer session on Reddit or posted up on the 6 o'clock news, labeled as a pandemic expert and talking about mandatory vaccinations, keeping everyone inside for the foreseeable future and grinning with glee, that's Bain Company. When you're nibbling on your plant-based name-brand fast food burger and get a mouthful of delicious Monsanto Roundup, that's Bain Company. When you take a swig of your mocha frappa latte only to get inundated with a myriad of social agendas flying out of Starbucks headquarters, you guessed it, that's Bain Company. And if you're already a liberal anyway and you enjoy such agendas and a piping hot cup of coffee from Starbucks, remember your worldview is being socially engineered by the work of Republican candidate for president, wholesome Mormon governor and sitting senator Mitt Romney, and a bunch of crusty old fellas who've been with Bush Sr. since the days of Skull and Bones.
Yep, there's a Skull and Bones. I just did that review of the Committee of 300, and it states that as one of the avenues in which they operate behind the scenes.
So we followed the money, but where did we arrive? Well, in this video, we arrived at one tiny centralized little group, all owned and operated either by Skull and Bones CIA Financial Investment and Management Arm, otherwise known as Bain, or it's owned and operated by Mossad, Carlyle, or BlackRock. This group has unlimited money and power to take over companies and industries they deem crucial. And these folks have unlimited money because they're literally sitting on the board of the Federal Reserve. Which brings us to Bill Gates' family legacy, eugenics. Now rebranded as population control with Planned Parenthood on his father's side and the Federal Reserve Bank on the other. Everything Bill Gates has ever touched, from Microsoft to Starbucks to Bayer, Monsanto, vaccine makers, and plant-based burgers, it was all managed by Bain & Company. They're the ones who put Microsoft computers at every desk in every office, in every government building, in the computer lab of every school. And these computers and programs have the backdoor access for spying. This is your deep state, or at least a faction of it. What do you think, internet friends? You know, I always look forward to your comments.
I'll put the link in the bio. If you like the content, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, stay strong. We've got this. Thank you for listening to the Unveiling Shadows podcast. I hope today's episode has shed light on the experiences that too often remain hidden. If you or someone you know has a story to share, please reach out to me. Remember, you're not alone and your voice matters. Follow me on social media and subscribe to the podcast for more inspiring stories. Until next time, stay strong and keep unveiling the shadows.